September 30th, 1979. Police in Tustin, California, respond to a late-night emergency call at apartment 2B. Inside, 23-year-old Elena Marino, 9 months pregnant, found brutally beaten. Beside her crib, a single bloody handprint and an open window swaying in the night air. Her newborn is gone. By sunrise, every news station in Orange County is live outside Willow Gardens. Neighbors lighting candles, detectives combing the complex, a husband in handcuffs. For 15 years, the case stayed cold. Until DNA revealed a truth no one saw coming. What really happened that night? And who still remembers? Tell us where you're watching from, and don't forget to subscribe for more true stories the headlines forgot. Autumn 1979. The streets of Tustin, a quiet town nestled in Orange County, California, were lined with gold-tipped sycamores and the faint smell of orange blossoms carried on the wind. It was a community where people left their doors unlocked, where neighbors borrowed cups of sugar and waved hello from their driveways, believing danger was something that happened somewhere else. But behind the pale blue door of apartment 2B at Willow Gardens, fate was quietly winding up for a tragedy that would haunt Tustin for decades. Elena Marino, 23, was the kind of woman who drew people in with her warmth. Her colleagues at Tustin Memorial Hospital described her as gentle, patient, someone who could soothe even the most frightened child with a few soft words and a smile. Her days were spent caring for others, but her nights were increasingly spent in worry. Folding tiny pastel baby clothes in the yellow nursery she and her husband, Daniel, had painted just 2 weeks before. There were little hand-knitted socks in a wicker basket, a plush lamb in the crib, and a name written in careful script on the wall above. Grace. She was due any day now. A new beginning, she hoped, for their little family. Daniel Marino, discharged just months earlier from the El Toro Marine Base, was a man visibly changed by war and secrets. In photos from his wedding, he looked broad-shouldered and proud, a Marine in crisp dress blues. But now, in the dim light of their apartment, his eyes seemed distant, jaw clenched tight with the weight of sleepless nights. Elena tried not to notice the way his hands sometimes shook, or how he'd stare for minutes at the television without seeing it, lost somewhere deep inside himself. There had been arguments, quiet at first, then louder. Neighbors pretended not to listen, but late at night, muffled words and occasional shouts seeped through the thin apartment walls. Once or twice, someone saw Elena with faint bruises on her wrists, which she explained away as clumsy accidents. Still, she clung to hope. Once the baby's here, things will change. He'll be happy again. He has to be. On the last evening of September, the air was thick with the sense of change. Elena spent hours preparing for the baby's arrival, lining up tiny onesies and humming lullabies from her childhood. At one point, she called her mother, voice trembling just slightly as she confessed, "I finally picked a name for her, Mom." In that moment, she sounded like any young woman about to become a mother, hopeful, a little scared, desperate to believe the world could be gentle. No one could have known those would be the last words anyone heard from Elena before everything changed. That night, as twilight slipped away and the hum of the freeway faded into silence, something else moved through the shadows outside apartment 2B. A car drove slowly past, headlights briefly illuminating the nursery window. Inside, Daniel sat alone in the living room, cigarette burning down to the filter, while Elena washed her face in the bathroom, humming softly. A sudden power flicker caused the overhead light to blink out for a moment, and when it returned, she found herself staring at her own worried reflection, wondering if she'd ever truly feel safe again. A dog barked somewhere in the distance. The neighbor's television clicked off, plunging the building into a hush, broken only by the gentle ticking of the kitchen clock. At midnight, Elena stood in the nursery one last time, tracing her finger over the name Grace on the wall. She didn't notice the shadow that paused by the apartment's back window, didn't hear the faint creak as the latch was tested. Downstairs, a pair of headlights flickered off, and a figure moved quietly, blending into the darkness. In homes across Tucson, people slept peacefully, secure in the illusion that bad things didn't happen here. But in apartment 2B, time was running out. In just a few short hours, Elena Marino's world, and the world of everyone who loved her, would shatter. And the quiet town of Tucson would wake to a nightmare it could never forget. In the months before the nightmare unfolded, apartment 2B at Willow Gardens had become a tiny universe of fragile hopes and hidden tensions. From the outside, the complex looked unremarkable. Stucco walls, neatly trimmed hedges, parking spaces dotted with old sedans and station wagons. Yet it was the sort of place where everyone knew at least something about their neighbors, or at least thought they did. Elena Marino was often the first to greet newcomers, her gentle smile a small comfort to those who found themselves far from home. She worked long shifts at Tucson Memorial Hospital, earning the respect of her colleagues and the trust of patients. She was the heart of our ward, a nurse would later recall. Evenings would find Elena carrying groceries up the stairs for elderly Mrs. Henderson, or tending to the shared garden with the children from next door. She was, as many said, the kind of person who made the world a little softer. But even the softest hearts can hide bruises. Close friends and family sometimes caught a glimpse of the strain behind Elena's composure. There were whispered phone calls to her sister, hushed confessions about Daniel's changing moods. Daniel Marino had returned from military service, changed in ways that defied easy explanation. The confident young Marine who had once swept Elena off her feet now struggled to find his footing in civilian life. Nightmares chased him through sleepless nights, and sudden, inexplicable anger would erupt over the smallest things: a forgotten bill, a misplaced set of keys. Neighbors couldn't help but notice the shift. Apartment walls, no matter how thick, couldn't mute the sound of raised voices or the sharp crack of something breaking against the floor. The older couple in 2A learned to turn up their radio when the yelling started. Others, gathering by the mailboxes, exchanged uneasy glances but said nothing. In small towns, people learn to keep secrets for the sake of peace, even when the silence feels heavy. Sometimes, Elena appeared with faint marks on her wrists, the sort that might come from a grab too tight or a fall too sudden. When asked, she would smile a little too quickly and blame her own clumsiness, insisting everything was fine. In truth, she believed things could still get better. She held on to hope with the quiet desperation of someone who has loved deeply and lost too much to let go. "Once the baby comes, he'll change," she confided to her sister, her voice trembling on the edge of belief. "He just needs something to hold on to." Daniel, for his part, seemed trapped by his own memories, haunted by shadows no one else could see. He made efforts, flowers brought home on payday, attempts at small talk with neighbors, long walks meant to clear his mind. But the anger would always creep back in, poisoning the air in apartment 2B. More than once he left late at night, driving aimlessly through the empty streets of Tucson, searching for something he couldn't name. The Willow Gardens complex itself was an odd crossroads of hope and hardship. Many residents were young couples, some with military ties, drawn by the proximity to El Toro Marine Base. There was a constant churn of new faces, men in uniform coming and going, wives and children learning to adapt to absence and return. The rhythms of military life pulsed just beneath the surface, reveille calls drifting from open windows, uniforms pressed and waiting in closets, stories of overseas postings shared over backyard fences. But beneath this veneer of order, an undercurrent of anxiety ran through the community. The base had seen its share of scandals, bar fights that got out of hand, rumors of violence covered up to protect reputations. Some whispered that a few of the men who'd come back weren't the same as when they left, that the things they'd seen had changed them in ways that could never be undone. For Elena, the apartment's cheerful nursery stood as a fragile promise that life could begin again, that love could win out over anger, and that Daniel could become the man she married once more. She filled the room with music and light, and sometimes, in the early mornings before Daniel woke, she would sit by the window and watch the world outside, praying for a future she wasn't sure she'd ever see. No one in Willow Gardens could have guessed how close tragedy had come, or how, in just one night, every carefully guarded secret would be dragged into the light. September 30th, 1979. In the deep hush of early morning, while the rest of Tustin slept under a shroud of peace, apartment 2B was about to become the scene of an unthinkable crime. The air was unnaturally still, as if the world itself was holding its breath, sensing the violence that crept ever closer. Inside the Marino apartment, the soft glow of the kitchen light cast long shadows on the walls. Elena was restless. She padded quietly through the nursery, adjusting a blanket in the crib, brushing her hand over the little lamb's ear. She lingered by the window, gazing out at the silent courtyard. There was no moon, only the vague outline of the parking lot and the occasional blink of a distant streetlight. She hugged her arms around her belly, the sense of unease too persistent to ignore. Daniel was nowhere to be seen. He had left earlier, mumbling something about needing food. He mentioned burgers from Jack in the Box, though his voice was strained and distracted. Elena told herself he just needed space, a brief escape from the pressure, from the baby who would soon arrive, and from the ghosts that still haunted him. She tried to convince herself that this was normal, that soon he'd walk through the door and everything would be all right. But outside, beyond the thin glass of the window, something was moving. At around 1:30 a.m., Mrs. Henderson in 2C woke to the sound of crashing glass and a sudden, sharp scream that was cut off as quickly as it began. She hesitated, uncertain if she'd truly heard anything at all. In the Willow Gardens complex, strange noises were not uncommon, and she eventually rolled over, telling herself it must have been the wind or the pipes or a dream. Inside 2B, chaos had erupted. The kitchen chair was overturned. The table bore a single vivid handprint smeared in blood, proof of a desperate struggle. The back window hung open, the curtain fluttering wildly as a cool draft swept through the room. The living room was in shambles, lamp knocked to the floor, baby clothes scattered, the faint scent of iron thickening the air. On the carpet, Elena's body lay motionless, her hair splayed around her like a dark halo, blood spreading in a silent, expanding pool. It was as if the world had stopped, suspended in that moment of horror. But the terror did not end there. When Daniel returned home at 2:10 a.m., parking his car in the dim lot and trudging up the stairs, he fumbled with his keys, not noticing the odd quiet. No light from the living room, no gentle sound of Elena's lullaby. He opened the door and froze. The scene before him didn't make sense. Elena on the floor, blood on the table and the carpet, the nursery door slightly ajar. In that instant, time fractured. He stumbled to her side, calling her name, hands shaking, mind unable to accept the reality in front of him. Within minutes, red and blue lights flashed outside Willow Gardens as first responders arrived. The police swept into the apartment, voices sharp and urgent. They quickly realized the nightmare was even worse than it seemed. The baby, Grace, was gone. There was no sign of forced entry, no footprints in the mud outside, no clue to where the child could have vanished. As dawn crept over Tustin, the apartment complex was cordoned off with yellow tape. Neighbors gathered in tight, whispering knots, eyes wide with disbelief. A single stuffed rabbit, dropped by a trembling hand, lay on the doorstep of 2B, a silent tribute to the baby who was now missing. Officers moved through the scene methodically, cataloging the overturned furniture, the blood spatter, the wide-open window. One detective lingered by the back curtain, frowning at the odd angle of the latch, the way the curtain billowed as if someone had left in a hurry. In that dreadful hour between night and morning, Tustin lost its innocence. A mother was fighting for her life. A baby had vanished, and a small, quiet community would never be the same. By sunrise, word of the tragedy had spread like wildfire through Tustin. The neighborhood awoke to the sound of sirens and the sight of yellow police tape fluttering in the morning breeze, a sight that seemed impossibly out of place in their quiet enclave. News vans crowded the curb outside Willow Gardens, satellite dishes raised to the sky, reporters rehearsing somber lines just beyond the cordoned-off entrance. Sleepy-eyed residents, clutching coffee mugs, clustered at their windows and doors, straining to make sense of the chaos that had erupted overnight. For decades, Tustin had thrived on a sense of safety. Children played unsupervised in cul-de-sacs. Neighbors exchanged casseroles at the holidays. And the worst trouble most people faced was a minor fender bender on their way to the market. Now, that illusion had been shattered. The sight of paramedics wheeling Elena, pale and unconscious, from her apartment, and the growing understanding that her baby was missing, sent tremors of fear and grief through the community. ABC Los Angeles led their morning broadcast with the breaking news. Pregnant woman attacked in Tustin, husband under investigation. The story flashed across TV screens in living rooms, diners, and hospital waiting rooms across Orange County. The Orange County Register published a front-page photo of Elena from her baby shower, smiling as she rocked in a white wicker chair, the hope of new life lighting up her face. Below the photo, the headline screamed the town's disbelief. Violence shatters quiet Tustin neighborhood. Baby missing. On the sidewalk outside Willow Gardens, a makeshift memorial began to take shape. Neighbors and strangers alike left candles in small glass jars, plush toys, and handwritten notes addressed simply to the baby who never got a chance. Some wept openly, others simply stood in silence, heads bowed, searching for words that would not come. It was as if the entire town was holding its breath, waiting for news, praying for a miracle that would never arrive. Elena's mother arrived at the scene just after dawn, collapsing into the arms of officers as she sobbed. "He couldn't have done this. He just couldn't." Her words echoed the desperate hope of those who knew the Marinos as a loving, if troubled, family. But not everyone shared her certainty. Already, whispers of suspicion were swirling. The police, stern-faced and methodical, escorted Daniel to a waiting patrol car, avoiding the cluster of reporters shouting questions. In a small town like Tustin, rumors moved fast. Some neighbors remembered the late-night arguments, the times they'd heard raised voices or caught glimpses of Elena's injuries. Others defended Daniel, insisting he was a good man, just under pressure. Detectives moved swiftly, piecing together the timeline of the night. They canvassed the apartment complex, knocking on every door, searching for witnesses or any scrap of information. A few neighbors mentioned the sound of a crash, or a scream, or seeing Daniel's car gone during the crucial hour. Others claimed to have seen nothing at all. The lack of answers only deepened the fear and uncertainty. In the days that followed, the tragedy became the only story anyone could talk about. Parents clutched their children tighter, locking their doors at night for the first time in years. The local church organized a vigil for Elena and her missing child, and hundreds gathered under flickering candlelight, the hush broken only by quiet sobs and whispered prayers. A sense of helplessness hung over the community, a wound that refused to close. All the while, law enforcement pressed forward. To them, every detail mattered. The angle of the overturned chair, the pattern of blood on the carpet, the open window swaying in the autumn wind. Forensic teams dusted for fingerprints, cataloged fibers and hairs, and logged every object that might hold a clue. But as the hours stretched into days, the question on everyone's lips remained unanswered. What really happened in apartment 2B that night? The small town of Tustin, once so sure of its safety, was left reeling. In their grief, the community rallied, but beneath their unity, suspicion and fear festered, and for the Marino family, the nightmare had only just begun. The investigation into what happened at apartment 2B quickly took on a life of its own, consuming not only law enforcement resources, but also the collective attention of the entire town. Detectives worked around the clock, retracing every step, replaying every second of the night that left Elena fighting for her life and her baby vanished. With the press and public demanding answers, pressure weighed heavy on everyone involved. From the start, the police zeroed in on Daniel Marino. He was, after all, the husband, a fact that, in too many tragic cases, pointed toward guilt. Within hours of the attack, Daniel found himself in a stark, windowless interrogation room at the Tustin Police Department. Under the harsh glare of fluorescent lights, he was grilled for 12 straight hours. His alibi seemed simple. He'd left the apartment around 1 a.m. for a late-night burger run, picked up food at Jack in the Box, and returned just after 2 a.m. But to detectives, the story felt thin, and every detail Daniel offered was picked apart, his words dissected for hidden meaning. They pushed him hard, revisiting old wounds. They brought up the arguments neighbors had overheard, the bruises on Elena's wrists, and Daniel's recent struggles since leaving the military. He denied everything, except his struggle to adjust, his exhaustion, his helplessness. But he insisted over and over, "I loved her. I would never hurt her." His voice, hoarse and trembling, was met with skepticism and blank stares. In another room, officers sorted through his belongings, searching for anything that could link him to the crime. Meanwhile, forensic investigators combed the scene for clues. They found no sign of forced entry. The back window was open, but the latch wasn't broken, and there were no unfamiliar fingerprints, just those belonging to Daniel and Elena. There was a bloody handprint on the table, but it, too, matched only the couple. Neighbors were questioned again and again. One swore they heard a deep male voice shouting just before the crash and scream that broke the night's silence. Another said they saw Daniel's car leave, only to return much later than he claimed. The threads of evidence were tangled, but the focus remained on Daniel. As the hours wore on, the weight of suspicion settled heavily on him. Elena, meanwhile, hovered between life and death in the ICU at Tustin Memorial Hospital, her condition critical. Police and prosecutors waited anxiously for any sign she might wake, hoping she could shed light on what had happened that terrible night. Finally, after days of uncertainty, Elena opened her eyes. Doctors rushed to her side, followed quickly by detectives and prosecutors. She was weak, her mind clouded by medication and trauma, her memories fragmented. Yet as her mother held her hand, Elena managed to whisper two haunting words. "Daniel, please." The words were ambiguous, a plea perhaps, or a memory, but for law enforcement, it was enough. They interpreted it as confirmation of Daniel's guilt. That was all the prosecution needed. The Orange County District Attorney moved quickly, charging Daniel Marino with assault causing fetal death, a charge that carried a sentence of 15 years to life. The trial was swift, driven by public outcry and the mounting evidence, circumstantial though it was. Daniel maintained his innocence, never wavering, insisting that he had been gone when the attack happened. But in the eyes of the jury, his troubled marriage, the late-night arguments, the lack of other suspects, and Elena's broken whisper were damning. The verdict fell like a hammer. Guilty. Daniel's world collapsed around him as he was led away in handcuffs, the cries of Elena's family echoing through the courtroom. He was sent to prison, branded a monster in the eyes of the community, as the headlines proclaimed justice served. But in the darkness of his cell, Daniel Marino held fast to his truth. "I didn't do it." No one listened. Not yet. The years that followed Elena's attack seemed to stretch out endlessly, marked by cold hospital corridors, locked doors, and questions that never found answers. For Elena Marino, survival was both a blessing and a curse. She awoke from her coma changed in ways that ran deeper than any physical wound. Her memories of that night were fractured, sometimes sharp, sometimes lost to fog and fear. Days blurred together in a haze of pain medications, physical therapy sessions, and the suffocating grief of losing her child before ever holding her. She was not the same woman who had once brought sunshine to the Willow Gardens complex. Shadows followed her everywhere now. Elena would catch herself staring at her own hands, as if searching for something left behind. Nightmares haunted her sleep, vivid and recurring. The rush of cold air from the open window, the blinding pain, the sound of a baby's cry swallowed by darkness. Sometimes she screamed herself awake, gasping for breath, as her mother tried desperately to soothe her. The cheerful nursery she'd prepared was left untouched, its yellow walls and tiny clothes a cruel reminder of what had been stolen. Meanwhile, Daniel Marino's life was reduced to a narrow cell and the rhythm of prison life. Roll calls, meal lines, the constant hum of distrust. The world beyond those walls quickly forgot his name, except as a footnote to a tragedy. Inmates called him baby killer and kept their distance. A few looked for a fight, seeking to punish what they believed to be true. Daniel survived on stubbornness and ritual, never missing a day in the prison library, never failing to write letters professing his innocence, though they rarely drew a reply. His days became a series of questions with no answers. His only company, the echo of his own protests. "I didn't do it." Over time, even that conviction grew quiet, drowned by the routine cruelty of incarceration. Outside those walls, life in Tustin crawled forward, but beneath the surface something else began to stir. The memory of Elena's attack remained raw for some, a warning that even in the safest places, evil could strike. And then, whispers began to spread. News filtered through the community of other women, alone in their apartments, attacked in the dead of night. The police reports came in fragments. A mother bludgeoned in her bed near El Toro base. Another woman left for dead. Her attacker vanished without a trace. The details were eerily familiar. A window forced or left open. A sudden, brutal assault. The same overwhelming violence. The media dubbed the mysterious perpetrator the night intruder. At first, no one connected these crimes to Elena's case. Daniel's conviction had offered closure, however uneasy, to a frightened town. But for a few detectives, doubts began to grow. The pattern was too consistent, the locations too close to the old Marine base. As months turned to years and the list of victims grew, the unease in Tustin deepened. Locked doors became the norm. Women changed their routines, sleeping with lights on or moving in with relatives. Vigilance became a way of life. Elena, lost in her grief and confusion, remained mostly unaware of these new horrors. But sometimes, on sleepless nights, she'd catch a news report about the night intruder and feel a cold shiver race up her spine, as if some hidden part of her recognized the darkness described on TV. She clung to the routines that remained, weekly visits with her mother, brief walks in the early morning, therapy sessions where she tried, again and again, to piece together memories that felt just out of reach. All the while, Daniel languished in prison, his appeals rejected, his voice lost in a system that had moved on. In Tustin, people remembered the tragedy every September, leaving flowers outside apartment 2B, whispering prayers for Elena and Grace. But few dared to wonder if justice had really been done, or if a far more dangerous truth was lurking just beyond the edges of their tidy suburban world. By the mid-1990s, time had weathered both wounds and memories, but it had not healed them. The name Daniel Marino was all but forgotten outside the dusty file drawers of the Orange County Courthouse. Elena, still fragile and living in the half-light of old trauma, had become a ghost to her own past. The night intruder had stopped, or at least moved on, and the community of Tustin tried to close the door on a chapter it never truly understood. But in 1996, science began to catch up with justice. In labs across America, new DNA technology was rewriting the rules of evidence, giving voice to the voiceless and raising hope for those who'd been left behind by a system that prized quick resolution over hard truth. In Orange County, a young forensic analyst, just out of graduate school and eager to make a difference, pulled the old Marino file from storage, dusted off the box, and saw possibility where others saw closure. She found the preserved samples, hair, fibers, dried blood scraped from the living room carpet of apartment 2B. Back in 1979, these bits of evidence had yielded little, but now, with the precision of polymerase chain reaction and the promise of genetic fingerprinting, the case could be seen with new eyes. Under the sterile glow of lab lights, she ran the samples against the California DNA database, a process that, at the time, felt almost miraculous. The results came back clear as day. The DNA found on Elena's body and at the crime scene did not match Daniel Marino. In fact, it didn't match anyone in the database, until, on a hunch, the analyst cross-referenced profiles of discharged servicemen from El Toro base around the time of the attacks. That's when the name Gerald Parker surfaced, a former Marine, long since moved out of state, whose checkered past had never drawn attention until now. When investigators tracked Parker down and confronted him with the evidence, the case unraveled in a matter of hours. Parker's confession was chilling in its simplicity. "I saw the door open. She was sleeping. I didn't mean to kill her." He spoke in halting, emotionless sentences, recalling details only the perpetrator could know. The layout of the nursery, the faint lullaby music that played from a radio, the way Elena had tried to reach the phone before collapsing. The news broke quickly. "DNA miracle exonerates imprisoned husband," read headlines from coast to coast. Daniel Marino, after 15 years of living as a villain, was suddenly and irrevocably vindicated. The case was splashed across newspapers and television screens, with legal analysts, police chiefs, and true crime reporters dissecting every failure in the investigation. In the halls of the courthouse, lawyers who had once argued for Daniel's conviction now spoke solemnly of justice delayed, of lessons learned too late. Daniel's release from prison was both triumphant and heartbreaking. He stepped into the blinding sunlight, a free man, greeted by a handful of reporters, lawyers, and distant family. His hair was streaked with gray, his eyes hard and hollow from years of suspicion and survival. He thanked the analyst who'd believed the evidence could still speak, but there was no celebration, just quiet, exhausted relief. For Elena, the DNA revelation landed like a thunderclap. The man she had once loved, whose name had haunted her dreams with both longing and fear, was innocent. The true monster had worn a different face all along. She gave a brief, tearful interview, speaking haltingly about forgiveness, about wanting peace for her family, about never truly escaping the shadows of that night. "I just hope," she said softly, "that the truth brings healing. For all of us. For the town of Tustin, and for anyone who ever believed justice was always just. A hard lesson had been learned." The headlines called it the miracle of DNA. But for Daniel, for Elena, and for everyone left in the wake of a wrongful conviction, it was a miracle paid for in lost years, shattered trust, and the faint hope that finally the truth had been heard. Daniel Marino's freedom was headline news, but outside the media glare, life after exoneration proved more complicated than anyone expected. Tustin tried to move forward, yet the events of that long-ago night cast a shadow over the town and its people, refusing to fade. Elena, once the symbol of hope and healing, was now the face of a different tragedy. A woman robbed not only of her child, but of her memories, her peace, and her trust in the world around her. Daniel found no welcome committee waiting to embrace him. Friends and neighbors who had once condemned him now avoided eye contact. Some whispered apologies, but most simply didn't know what to say. Daniel returned to a world that had kept going without him, a world where every routine felt unfamiliar. Every street held memories of betrayal. The justice system had set him free, but it could not give him back his lost years or erase the anger that burned quietly beneath the surface. For Elena, the ordeal was far from over. The news of Gerald Parker's confession and the knowledge that her attacker had been someone she had never met brought a strange, bittersweet relief. But it also unlocked new questions and old fears. In the weeks after Daniel's release, Elena began to piece together fragments of memory from that terrible night. One afternoon, during a therapy session, she remembered something that had haunted her for years, but never fully surfaced. There had been 2 men in her apartment, not one. The memory came to her in flashes, the feeling of being watched, the sound of unfamiliar footsteps, a voice that seemed oddly familiar yet just out of reach. She told detectives, one of them, "He felt familiar. I think he knew me." Her words sent a ripple of unease through the investigation. If Parker was the night intruder, who was the second man? And why had the evidence pointed so strongly at Daniel in the first place? Spurred by Elena's memories, investigators reopened the case file. Forensic teams revisited the physical evidence, re-examining fingerprints and trace materials from the apartment. Then, on the windowsill of the back window, overlooked for years, they discovered a partial print that didn't match either Parker or Daniel. The print was faint, smudged by time and exposure, but it was undeniably human. A new suspect, an accomplice, or perhaps a witness who had never come forward? The revelation brought a flicker of hope for answers, but the trail had long gone cold. The print was run through every available database, but there was no match. Witnesses from Willow Gardens were interviewed again, but memories had faded, details blurred by the passing years. The investigation lingered for months, but with no new leads or evidence, the case was quietly shelved once more, filed away with other cold cases that haunted Orange County's archives. Yet, every September 30th, something peculiar continued. At dawn, a single white bouquet would appear on the doorstep of apartment 2B. No one ever saw who left it. The flowers were always fresh, always the same, simple white lilies tied with a blue ribbon. Some speculated it was Elena, paying tribute to the life she'd lost. Others believed it was Daniel, seeking a measure of closure. But a few whispered that it might be someone else entirely, the mysterious accomplice, living with secrets, unable to let go. The truth lingered, unresolved, a wound left open. For the families involved, and for the people of Tustin, closure remained elusive. The lesson was clear. Even when the system corrects itself, not all questions are answered, and some shadows never fully lift. The story of apartment 2B became legend in Tustin, a cautionary tale told to new residents, a chilling reminder that justice, even when served, is sometimes incomplete. And in the hush of early autumn mornings, the memory of that night returned, as real and unsettling as the day it happened, refusing to fade into history. As the years passed, and Tustin tried to reclaim a sense of normalcy, the story of apartment 2B and the fate of Elena and Daniel gradually merged with the town's collective memory. A tragedy both unique and universal, its details softened and blurred by time, but its impact enduring. Yet, for those who followed the case closely, or who had lived through it, the story always felt unfinished, haunted by unanswered questions and the ache of lost time. And in a sense it was unfinished, because the nightmare that unfolded in Tustin was not just fiction. It was inspired by a very real and very painful chapter in American criminal justice. The fictionalized events at Willow Gardens drew from a crime that stunned Orange County, California, in 1979. In that real case, a young woman named Dianna was brutally attacked in her own home while she was 9 months pregnant. Her life was changed in an instant, her hopes for motherhood shattered by a violence no one could have foreseen. As with Elena, Diana's husband, Kevin Green, found himself at the center of suspicion. He, too, was a veteran struggling with the challenges of civilian life, and he, too, faced mounting circumstantial evidence and the emotional weight of a community desperate for justice. The investigation into Diana's attack followed a familiar, tragic path. Neighbors recalled arguments, Police scrutinized every inconsistency in Kevin's story, and prosecutors built a narrative around his supposed guilt. Evidence was thin, but public pressure was overwhelming. Kevin Green was convicted and sentenced to 15 years to life for a crime he insisted he did not commit. In prison, he became a symbol of everything that could go wrong in a justice system focused on quick answers over hard truths. For years, the real perpetrator eluded capture. And then, just as in the story of Daniel Marino, the science of DNA transformed everything. In 1996, samples preserved from the crime scene were retested using technology that had not existed at the time of the attack. The results were shocking, exonerating Kevin and implicating a different man entirely. Gerald Parker, a serial offender who would come to be known as the bedroom basher. Parker's crimes stretched across Orange County, with a string of assaults and murders that haunted families and investigators for years. The real case became a watershed moment for forensic science, demonstrating both the devastating consequences of wrongful conviction and the life-saving potential of DNA evidence. Kevin Green walked out of prison after 15 lost years, a free man, but forever changed by what had been taken from him. Dianna, though she survived, carried the scars of trauma, memory loss, and unimaginable grief. Their story remains a testament to human endurance, the fragility of justice, and the ways that hope and truth sometimes emerge from the darkest places. The tragedy of Orange County did not end with a neat resolution. For many, it raised enduring questions. How many others, wrongly accused, remain behind bars? How do we repair the lives torn apart by mistakes that can never fully be undone? And most hauntingly, how do families move forward when justice, even when served, can never return what was lost? In the decades since, the case has become a cautionary tale taught in law schools, debated in police academies, and recounted by journalists searching for meaning in senseless violence. It is a reminder that even the best intentions can go astray, and that the pursuit of justice must always be guided by evidence, patience, and a willingness to question first impressions. In the story of Elena Marino and Daniel, as in the true story of Dianna and Kevin, the lessons echo: the need for careful investigation, the power of science, and the enduring hope that even the coldest cases can someday yield the truth. Tonight, as dusk settles over the quiet streets of Tustin, the story of Apartment 2B lingers in the collective memory, a chilling reminder of how quickly ordinary lives can be swept up in extraordinary tragedy. With each passing year, the pain of what happened to Elena Marino, her lost child, and Daniel Marino does not simply disappear. It becomes woven into the fabric of the town's identity, retold in whispers and warnings, remembered in bouquets of lilies and the flicker of candles on anniversary nights. But more than a story of violence, suspicion, and heartbreak, this case, and the true case that inspired it, stands as a stark lesson in the necessity of truth. The suffering endured by Elena, left with scars both seen and unseen, and by Daniel, imprisoned for a crime he did not commit, speaks to the deep flaws and powerful redemptive possibilities of the justice system. For the families affected, for the detectives and advocates who never stopped searching for answers, and for all who yearn for justice, the case of Apartment 2B endures as a call to vigilance and compassion. In honoring Dianna, the real woman behind this fictional tale, we remember not just a victim, but a survivor, a young mother whose strength and resilience illuminated the darkest corners of her ordeal. She endured unimaginable loss, but her perseverance helped change the course of justice, proving that the truth, however long delayed, can break through the most stubborn walls. Her story, like Elena's, is a testament to the courage required to survive, to heal, and to bear witness when the world isn't ready to listen. We also honor Kevin Green, who spent 15 years in prison for a crime he did not commit. His story, echoed in Daniel Marino's fictional Ordeal, is a cautionary tale that wrongful convictions are not merely statistics. They are lives forever altered, families divided, futures lost. The triumph of DNA science in these cases demonstrates that hope can be found even in the most hopeless places, and that technology, when paired with dogged human determination, can right the most grievous wrongs. But the lesson goes even further. For every family waiting for answers, every cold case gathering dust in a police archive, the story is not just about loss and error, but about perseverance. Each year, advocates, journalists, and forensic experts pore over old files, searching for the missing piece, the overlooked fingerprint, the silent witness who may at last step forward. Justice is not a finish line, but a journey, one that requires listening to victims, questioning assumptions, and never allowing silence to stand in for truth. In Tustin, each September 30th brings quiet acts of remembrance. The bouquet on the doorstep of apartment 2B, the memorial at the old Willow Gardens complex, the moment of silence at the local church. These are reminders that even when the headlines fade, the need for healing, accountability, and truth perturb us.